Welcome to the Chris Rod Mac Show, where every week we talk about the latest news in AI, connect with AI founders on their ambition, and also discuss the implications of AI for tech, for companies, and for humanity. And today I'm joined by my co-hosts Rod and Max. Welcome. Hi.
Please.
And we have quite really exciting news to discuss. Obviously, one of the biggest one I want to dive into is the OpenAI reveal from yesterday. And then also we will be talking a little bit around barriers and adoption of AI tools, software, and we also discuss a little bit about automation. So really excited and let's dive right into it. So on the OpenAI reveal, so yesterday it was shared that there's this ChatGPT 4o, an omni model to interact with human beings. So maybe let's start with you, Rod. What do you think about it? Can you describe a little bit the features as someone who's obviously more in the product management realm? Tell us what you think.
Yes, of course. This was an interesting announcement where I could see the divide between like the tech world, those who are building with AI and those who are using AI. And I mean that because on one side, those who are building applications with AI, they felt this was an underwhelming announcement. They were rather disappointed. They were expecting, for example, a competitor to Google, like a search engine. They were expecting like massive improvements in the models and so on. But what came out was not that. It was something that is much more for like end users. And for that reason, on the normal user side, on the end user side, people were super excited because what happened was that until now we had pretty much two models. We have ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4. The first one was free, was a bit basic, made a lot of mistakes and so on. The second one was much better, but was expensive. So really for the majority of people who were interacting with AI, they only knew the free version. They were not paying for GPT-4. And then their impression was that it was not good. But now what is happening is that there was a new model that was released, GPT-4o, and the previous one, GPT-4, which was the best one so far, became free, free of charge. And therefore, we had as a result that now normal people, everyone, has access to really what was until very recent the best top of breed model in the ecosystem. So there was that. There were also announcements on, for example, what people call like a hair-like so assistant. So where pretty much it has a female voice and you can interact with it and you can see like these sleek demo videos where you can, for example, do mathematical equations together. It understands, of course, so images. It understands, obviously, so like voice and so on. So there was that. But I think like the biggest so announcement is more on democratization of what was until now a model out of reach for the majority, that it became now available to everyone.
Thanks. And Max, what do you think about it?
I think that's an interesting one. Maybe I am more on the consumer side. I actually felt this was quite cool from a release perspective. I think from an investment point of view, I feel like it's actually quite good for any sort of application builder on top of it, especially from an economic standpoint, because obviously from an availability and pricing perspective, it becomes cheaper, and also like Rod was saying, the initial high-end model now becomes more readily available for you and I, which means you and I could build some random agents to do some, relatively low-level tasks at a better efficiency. So indirectly, I think, as a consumer, as an investor, I felt that it was a very good thing. So to be honest, I'm quite excited about it. So just reading through it, I was trying to build an agent myself, right? Just do macro research, for example, because of this announcement, because it's so much better.
So what I'm hearing from you both is one, that there are split opinions about expectations versus reality. And I think, Rod, you're alluding to the search engine that didn't come. But on the other hand, we see a democratization of the product that used to be behind a paywall and now is free with the ChatGPT 4.0. For those that have not seen the release yesterday, so the major changes on 4.0 is basically to be able to communicate with ChatGPT with different formats. So text, audio, video, And also, I think the second thing is obviously they improved the tone of voice so that it actually feels like talking to a human being. And I think in the demonstration, ChatGPT also tended to be a bit on the funny side, making people laugh, which I think is also something very, a big step towards humanization of robots, I would say. And we saw better language processing. I think they did a demo on real time translation between English and Italian. And I think this whole multimodal thing is something, at least from a consumer standpoint, is quite a big step in terms of use case and in terms of ease of use. And I think I want to add another perspective to it, which is I think what struck me quite a bit is how fast paced the product development on large language models have been. And just to remind ourselves, December 22 is when ChatGPT launched. I think it took 5 days for it to gain or garner 1 million users. I think by January 23, so a month later, it was already 100 million users. And then just about a year later, there's GPT-4 coming out. Just about a year later, there's GPT-4o coming out. So what do you think about that development speed? What do you think? What are some of the implications now that ChatGPT has become much more human and perhaps more like the Scarlett Johansson in Her, the movie with the serial-like companion?
I want to underscore that on the improvements that has happened in this year pretty much. So where we had this situation where we had these two family of models. It was so GPT-3 and GPT-4, and 4 was the best model for pretty much a year, and nothing had happened. Other competitors like Anthropic, of course, Alphabet with Google and its Gamma models and so on came out, but they were never as good as in GPT-4. And within matters of pretty much weeks, around March, first with Anthropic, Claude, and later with so the Meta Llama 3 that was released just a month ago. What happened was that open source free models became pretty much as good, if not better, than a GPT-4. And that might also have triggered a little bit of pressure on OpenAI's side to release improvements and make innovations as fast as possible, because for 1 year they were the leaders in the field, and all of a sudden, for a few weeks, they were not anymore. They were not like the number one, the number two models in the market. Now that has changed, that has reverted, but we are seeing how on one side we have competition from all sides, so Meta, Anthropic, other players, plus of course like the open source releases. And here also yesterday we had this big announcement from Google as well. So they had also their own AI event, and there they announced the release of, on one side, smaller models that fit in your mobile phone, for example. Also more open source models available, so for free to use, and another tools. So here we're seeing that in pretty much, let's say, like 1 year, the market was completely dominated by OpenAI with its family of models, and in this first quarter of the year, that has completely changed.
I think if I were to add to that, I think what's interesting to me, exactly like you say, is the speed. What comes to mind reminds me of an interview that Jensen Huang did, which is the CEO of NVIDIA, talking about how AI going forward is about scaling law, where using more data, adding more networks, adding more layers is where you would get a lot of the I would say upside from those large models. I think to Rod's point, like for a while there isn't anything that comes out of OpenAI, but at the same time we know that OpenAI was trying to do a lot of those AI deals, I would say data deals with all your different publishers. I actually see them leading this part of the world more and more going forward. And especially if we think about pulling different concepts together. For example, last week we talked about Ben Evans. It's he thinks that Gen AI is really all about pattern recognition. So the more pattern you can have in the system, the more pattern recognition you can become, and therefore you have a more accurate way of representing humans, for example. And I think that will continue to develop. Will it be applicable to all use cases? We do not know, but it's definitely interesting. And then to Rod's point, I've been thinking about this a lot, I guess, from an investment standpoint. At what point that a startup with a specified knowledge will actually be better than an omni like model. So does that mean that with the access to proprietary data, you're better at certain things to build on top of omni, or will the ongoing building of omni eventually help you to be obsoleted all the extra proprietary knowledge, because you're so much better when it comes to identifying those patterns? I don't know the answer, but we do know there are folks building on both sides of the equation, if you will, or like a barbell effect, right? We see a lot of that going. So it's just interesting to see how it will unfold going forward. I do not know where value creation will come from, but I know today OpenAI is worth a lot. So yeah.
I want to say on the topic of these multimodalities, also another topic that has not been discussed enough, how this has evolved over time. Because also when we think about when ChatGPT and GPT-3 back in late 2022 went live, this was pretty much just a text-to-text model, a smart chatbot. I will write something, I will get a result, and so on. It was not yet possible that I would, for example, upload an image and ask to describe it, or that I could, for example, have a table and say, hey, extract, let's say, like the most relevant information from this table and summarize it for me, and so on. So this ability to, on one side, send as an input an image and then obtain as an output text, or maybe something else, maybe another image, maybe audio, and so on. This happened in the last, let's say, 6 to 8 months. And here again, not only things have become much better, but also much cheaper and much more available so freely available to everyone.
Definitely. And what I'm hearing from you, both of you, is definitely the race to more features, as you mentioned, Rod, and the different other competitors in the market. And then Max, I think you mentioned data complexity and understanding specialized data. And I think this is something that I find is, it's almost like we're unlocking new levels as we go over time, right? And as you described, like, okay, first it was text to text, now and then it was, okay, you had a possibility to do text to image. Now there's something where you can put in an image and you get some analysis, and then they added voice. And I think, if I think about the release yesterday, I think about so many different industries now needing to think about how they're going to use it or how they can actually take advantage of it. For example, I mean, one of the new features is actually detecting emotions and seeing emotions, which I think is, I do have to say, I find it a bit scary, because obviously you could apply this to so many different use cases, right? Like interviews can be now conducted or trained. Like if you want to like prepare for an interview, you can actually do that. And the 4o can probably tell you whether your voice sounded a bit shaky or a bit nervous or something like that. But you could also apply this to a sales call, right? And you could also make use to train your sales force much better using such a, if you were to pack it into like a training module. I think there's also application in sort of coaching, like psychological kind of sessions, like anything that has to do with humans and emotions and having to like deal with that. I think this is a completely new way of unlocking complex tasks with 4o. I think on another side, if you think about the complex tasks, for example, as a former consultant, I mean, there's a lot of like different types of formats you need to like digest, from graphs, charts, Excel files, text, whatever it is. Now you can like feed it into the machine, and it will not only just give you like a summary, like which we had previously, which is text, but you could also ask to summarize it in graphs. And I think that is very powerful, and also something where I believe all the big consultancies will need to think about how they're going to deal with it.
Entirely. So as you're saying, Chris, I was thinking just now on when you were saying, for example, so here, so sales software and so on. I use it so quite frequently, and one of the things that I see and I think about is the ability to, for example, detect emotions and do the transcriptions and so on has been on the market for quite a while. So already, let's say like 2020, 2019, it was possible to add a smart assistant to your Zoom call, and then it will record the meeting and then create a transcript. But what I've been noticing is really in the last few months how much better these transcripts have been getting. Not only on the ability to transcribe and, for example, detect different accents, understand that people pronounce things differently and so on, but also on summarizing and providing the relevant information. So we're seeing not only, let's say, that new applications are appearing, but those that were already there for quite a few years, they're getting so much better.
Yeah. And Max, they also released this real-time translation. I don't know. What do you think about that? Will we see a babblefish like plugged into our ear, and then we'll be able to just talk to anyone? What do you think?
I think real-time translation has been touted for some time, right? Even I remember the first one that I heard from was like Skype, right? Where they envision one day where we will speak to people around the world in different languages, and then you will just directly translate it onto what the other person is talking about. I think the real-time thing is super interesting. I think when I was in uni, I was trying to build like a small little, I don't know, like a little glasses that translate what's in front of you into voice for people who are, visually impaired, basically. And what I realized is back then, obviously, it's not so available when it comes to technology. It doesn't actually translate quickly or in real time. With this ability, basically all I have to do is, take a picture, send it over to, I don't know, chat GPT, and then they will just return it back, and they can read it out on the glasses itself immediately what's in front of you, like in real time. So you would help a lot of cases like that. That's something I could think of. I think the other thing that comes to mind when you talk about all these different senses, if you will, different models. To me, it's basically human senses. Human has 5 senses. That's what we learned. We now know, with technology, it really captured like 3 of that, right? We talk about visual, we talk about voice, and then we talk about text, for example, or whatever different senses. I think the more we can codify these senses, the more patterns we're able to pick it up, and the more accurate, I guess, it will be going forward. Therefore, and then what is differentiating them and a human? Because they are able to do the exact thing that we are able to do. So I find that super interesting, in a way, in which then everything around the world will have to change a little bit, right? Because everything around you, as Steve Jobs said, are created by people no smarter than you. They're designed for human beings that we know and use today. And if things changes, what would that be like? There's an overhaul of industries that are going to come,
Oh,
and
definitely.
super interesting.
Yeah.
Which means there are a lot of
Hmm.
opportunities, value creation, value destruction. Love to
And
see that. Yeah.
and Rod, what do you think about this whole real-time language thing? I know, I mean, your family is all over the place. Like, do you think this will be an interesting little gadget?
I was reflecting on what Max was saying on having this like, translation and so on. And so one important thing to underscore is that it will not be necessarily to send it to OpenAI, because now the models are getting not only so much better, and also the open source versions are competitive and on par to the ones that OpenAI, Alphabet and so on offer, but also again smaller to the point that they can fit in a mobile phone. And in here also there was this month the release of like this new iPad, so from Apple's side, which is also like this huge player who in theory should be doing much more in AI, but we do not hear that much in any case. And what was touted was that these new chipsets that are coming in the new iPads, so the M4 chipsets, are supposed to be AI chips. And so far, they don't have yet this functionality. But what I can envision is that both Google with its Android phones, as well as, of course, so Apple with all its iPhone and iPad so lines, they will be able to include there directly these powerful local models, such that Mac's application of live translation never leaves the device. It always happens on device locally. And I can see this as something very useful. So I still have memories of, for example, I was 2019 in China, and it was very complicated to communicate,
Yeah.
and it was something. So on one side, of course, it was difficult. So with the internet, so using a type of like Google Translate and so on will not really work. And also at the same time, well, everything will be in a language I don't understand at all. So the fact that if I just bring my mobile phone and I can pretty much have live translation, point at things, point also just record and then automatically transcribe these, have automatic answers, and it's only everything running locally, it is completely transformative.
I I agree with you, and 100% Chinese is definitely a bit of a more difficult language. We spoke about the new reveal, let's say, of OpenAI, and I think we spoke about the speed of how things are developing, and I think that's also one of our contribution with this podcast to just like shed a bit of light in it. And that actually brings me to the second topic we wanted to talk about today, which is the biggest drivers and barriers to AI adoption. And obviously, if you're not knowledgeable, you could feel very scared about, like, okay, will you be talking to a robot that actually pretends to be human? So there was a study released by, I think, IBM, the AI Adoption Index in 23. And I think the three biggest barriers of AI is limited AI skills, expertise, or knowledge, followed by data complexity and ethical concerns. Now, maybe we start with that. And what do you guys think? Like, how do you look at these barriers? Do you think they will ease in the future? What do you think also in conjunction with yesterday's reveal? How will that develop in the next coming months?
The topic of reskilling is, let's say, like perennial. It's always there, and I can also see it even on IT experts, so developers and so on. So who until now they were doing, let's say, application development, web development, just regular programming, and they're noticing, hey, I need to somehow get into this AI wave. I need to so update my profile. And this is like on the IT level. But then, of course, there is also the topic of those who are just regular office workers, so who are in the marketing department, who are so doing HR and so on. Or here again, they also need to understand how to start applying these tools. Because reality is also, when I go and talk to people and I say, hey, have you used, let's say, like ChatGPT? Some people have used it, but still not common. And not only that, but also they only use it for, let's say, the most basic cases. They ask a question, they get an answer. Very, very few are doing image generation, so sending voice, doing things that are more advanced. And the large majority is still not doing anything. So this reskilling is happening at multiple layers. Those who are really at the end users of really so user facing marketing people, and then of course on the IT side.
Yeah, I
Max,
think you mentioned two things, which is talent and data. They're both complex. I guess one is just more of human behavior. So talent, when it comes to like adoption, I totally agree with Rod, which is, I see, in let's say my company, they roll out Copilot, but not everybody uses Copilot, right? I use that for all the transcripts because I write detailed notes on my calls. And now it just reduced the amount of time I need to write down those notes or even refer it back. So that was really helpful. But I was thinking, as Rod said, like, how do I take this to another level? Hence why, at the start of the show, I mentioned I was trying to build some agents to do, very basic market research on some companies that I care about, instead of me doing it, or instead of me asking an analyst to do it, right? Because it's not a good use of their time, and it's also not really helpful to the process, because a lot of the times it's just screening. So I was thinking, can we use AI to change more of those process? But the more I think about it, the more I felt like, eventually you could change the entire process entirely. So I was watching this conference about some sort of investor conference, and the largest hedge fund, Bridgewater, they were just talking about what is their philosophy when it comes to investment. So it comes down to three things. Number one, understanding what is the fundamental truth, what is the cost and effect of certain economics and markets factor. Number two, it's about systematically try to turn them into, I would say, equations that you could track and you could play with. And number three, is more investment it's about diversifying. But the first two, systematic and fundamental, is how I think would happen to a lot of the things that we do in life, right? Fundamentally, when you say creation, what does that mean? Where do you get those information from? How do you process those information? How do you systematically then provide certain output? With AI, it kind of did that already with certain stuff. So that's why I said, for human adoption, a lot of it will feel threatened to them. But I felt that, if people truly understand why they're doing certain things, then they have the fundamental understanding, and it's just about adopting AI to make that even more systematic for themselves. So I find that super interesting.
Yeah.
As for data, it's really just more about drawing a line in the sand, right? Which data belongs to who, which are the data that you can use, which are data you cannot use. There's some legal obligations because we don't have the liberty to start from ground zero, so we have to, build upon what we have today. Things like GDPR, etc. Right? So those are some of the things that come to mind when it comes to talent and data, which has been adoption barriers, if you will.
Right.
Max, you're really at the forefront of saying, I want to create like a set of agents that will help me with market research and so on. And this is something that I think is still missing in the whole AI rollout in the enterprise, in office and so on. So where for the majority of office workers, it's still not yet clear what is it possible to do. So what are like the frontiers? What can I implement? It's still first I need to know what I want in order to then do it. We don't have yet, let's say, like these applications such as Excel or Word, where everything's already encoded and I just click like a button. I know I click this button, I will get like a copy paste. I click this button, I will format this. First, right now, we have this objective of saying, for example, I want to do this market research. Then I know that there are agents to do this, and I develop the logic for this, and then it happens. But this requires a very deep understanding of what is possible, and the majority of people don't have that yet.
And I think, Max, we can use you as a role model because you're exploring and you're building your own agents with ChatGPT. And I think at the end of the day, change is the only constant, but human beings are really bad at changing. It's just our nature of wanting to be comfortable. And it really needs people to have this kind of time investment, this interest, this open-mindedness to actually explore and play around, be a bit more playful, and see what they can do with these tools. And I think with time, this barrier will actually get reduced because we have a lot of inventors and innovators that actually come up with new use cases, and you just have to like sort of follow. And I think that's one of the biggest, like I'd say, game changers once we get to that like inflection point, where we definitely will see more people adopt to AI.
And Chris, now that you were mentioning the adoption and embracing, it brought me memories of when 2016 I was at a large consumer goods company and trying to roll out back then the previous wave of AI developments. The largest barrier that I had was people unwillingness to adopt the technology. Many of them, they were afraid that with this, they will not be any more needed. And as a result, well, they will be terminated. So it was not that the technology was not there or it was not possible to do things, but more just convincing people to use it and that it helps them and it will not replace them. That was very, very challenging.
Yeah, the inertia is real from left, right, center, up, down, you name it. But I guess good thing about us as humans is we always tend to adapt, right, as a species. So I think we'll get there. I think this was the famous saying of what's the guy who wrote I can't remember, but there was a famous saying: "It's not the strongest or the smartest that survive; it's the one that adapt the best that survives." So
Adaptability.
yeah.
Alex, this is almost like a good closing, but I think we have another topic we want to just touch upon, which obviously is in the same line and vein, which is obviously, okay, how can we make our lives easier? And we spoke in a previous episode about automation, and perhaps let's dive into that a little bit more. And we want to talk about robotic process automation. And perhaps for the audience, Rod, can you just explain to us what that is exactly and why it's relevant?
Well, maybe people have heard about companies such as UiPath. The idea is basically that I can pretty much, let's say, like record a set of actions, like click here and there, and then I can repeat this, automate this process. And this is quite convenient, for example, in many large enterprises that are using very old systems, and then there is no way to communicate between the different systems. Where I have, for example, some data in one server and another one in another server, and there's no way for them to communicate, and I cannot really, let's say, write some code in order to move from point one to point B. Then I take something such as UiPath. I can pretty much automate this process, and then I can, let's say, create an extra layer on top of what is pretty much legacy, very, very old systems.
Okay, so basically you are replacing very repetitive, boring tasks through AI. And obviously, still there are some hurdles. I mean, we talked about barriers, but I think in general, automation is a very hard problem, and to do it well and to do it like in a way that is also adaptive. I mean, we spoke about a couple of startups that are in the space trying to solve that. But so the way I understand that is obviously you can replace repetitive tasks to clicking on a website and you just kind of let the machine do it. What do you guys think? Well, what's the implication for that on, for example, customer support? Some of these, like, more, let's say, Amazon Turk kind of mechanical Turk tasks. And what do you think this would mean for the future? Max, any thoughts?
So I think it's in the name, right? When it comes to repetitive tasks, there are quite a lot of them across any value chain, any single organization you can think of. Even when it comes to like production, it's about constantly producing the same thing over and over again in one small part, and someone else on the other part of the process to put it together over and over again when you have all the processes together. So I think the implication could be really, really huge. I think a lot of low level tasks can be replaced. For example, e.g., you could think of, let's say a client service, you come in and ask for some type of information. And if 80% of the people will always come in and ask for, I don't know, your current account balance versus your, the amount of credit available. And if people keep coming back and ask that, you don't need a person that sit at the back of it, that go and search those information and then send an email out. All those can and will be automated. It's just a matter of time. Obviously, that probably is a better example because we can see that everywhere today. But I think overall, I think coming back to what we were talking about, understanding the objective of what you're trying to do with a certain process, and then help you to map out what the process is like, having the ability to codify it and eventually to automate it. It's a super interesting thing, not just for the current process today, but also for future learnings, in my opinion, right? Because you're codifying certain processes, you're saying what it will do, what it won't do, and those knowledge can then be used to, I guess, train your future AI models as well. So it's both ways, right? It's just, it takes a little bit of hard work to do that today. So it's a little bit like setting policies within large corporates, right?
And I have here an anecdote of how actually these repetitive processes work in practice. So where also back in my enterprise days, it was something where we had a report that had to be prepared, so centralized, and for various reasons, it was not possible to have this information, everything on a database, but rather each regional office needed to send their numbers. And this will be, let's say, like on different Excel files, people use different formats and so on. And as a result, there will be a dedicated person whose only task was just to open these files, copy paste, and aggregate everything to provide like a global management version of this report that could be shared around in the central office. And this is something that with something like RPA can be so a little bit, so if not smoothed and then definitely improved. And but this is, let's say, like legacy, this is status quo. And I think here the latest developments on this week really combine nicely with this industry of RPA software. One problem that we had with the topic of agents, which is, let's say, like this next generation RPA processes, and this is next generation because instead of me, let's say, like clicking everywhere, so what I want to do and recording it, the agent, so to say, gets a goal saying, I want that you, for example, based on these files, generate a management report and, for example, prepare like a pie chart from this without you having to show it how it's done. This was the vision, but in practice, so far was very, very hard to get it right, because how this works in practice is that you have, let's say, multiple AI models. You have versions that are more affordable, like GPT-3, GPT-3.5, and so on, that are doing the grunt work, copy pasting, extracting information, and so on. And then you have an orchestrator that will be GPT-4 that will basically assemble everything. But this was not really affordable because GPT-4 was much more expensive. And also GPT-3 and GPT-3.5, which were these workhorses to do like the grunt work tasks, they were not really good. And with these releases, what we're seeing is, on one side, cost went down, so we can do more with a smaller cost. And two, it is that now also the models that were released on open source, they're also as good as the ones that are, let's say, like the paid ones. So I can see that really on so here, agent space, a lot will be happening. So they will be seeing that they will be tackling, they will be challenging UiPath and other players in the RPA space.
Yeah. And I want to add to that. And I think you're completely right with these different agents talking to each other, like actually working on one specific use case. The complexity of tasks can be so much wider and so much more complex. And I mean, I see this RPA process definitely useful in like accounting, for example. So lots of humans still need to like copy paste numbers from one sheet to another one, to another format, to another database, and back and forth. And obviously a lot of mistakes and errors can happen on that during that process. So I think that's a very fantastic use case for an RPA platform or software. I think another thing we touched upon on this is the right use case, right? Like, how do you record it? Is it something where the human needs to get involved and sort of like show the process? Or, Rod, as you mentioned, it's almost like, okay, this is the kind of goal I want. And so now you go figure it out, engine, to deliver that kind of output. And I think that's also where I think with the reveal of yesterday's capacity of 4o, this will be quite interesting to see how this is going to evolve with this omni model, and using different formats as input and output.
Yes, and we can picture it really like an orchestra. So where imagine that you have like a small team available to you with different roles, and each of these role is responsible for something. So one is responsible just for like copy pasting the number, one is responsible for like make them nicely formatted. Then someone else is like the expert consultant who will present this nicely, so for the end user and so on. And this is something that does not require this guidance, doesn't require that you really show them how to do it. And not only that, but also it can do it very fast. And now it's becoming something where it is being done at a very, very low cost. So I can see that really in the next 3-6 months, we'll see many new companies either announcing a lot of agent-like functionality to replace this RPA, such as UiPath, or existing players like UiPath. For sure, they need to release something to be so and compete.
Definitely.
Just to add to that, I think one thing that came to mind when both of you were speaking was like, Chris, when you were mentioning about, consultants, how consultants, when they go to a project, they said this is the big goal, and then they'll break it down into different work streams, and then different work streams, they have smaller work streams. It feels like RPA used to be the smaller work streams at the bottom, where they have to be very specific, very specified in order to do process automation. And then when Rod talks a little bit about, the orchestration is almost like, the senior partners of, of those large consulting projects, they are the one that, trying to push all the different work streams on what are the things that you need to look at. And then I think it's almost coming to its head where, what software is about, right? Software started with a giant clunky software. We break it down into microservices so that each microservice is doing something. And if you think about microservices, you go down, it's just code pulling from different libraries that have different things within it. So it's almost like AI comes to that level of process automation. So if you think about a giant company, they have input, process, output. What is the process? You break down the process. What is it that turn a raw material into something that you can build with, right? There will be process there. Then you just break it down even further and further, and then you just start automating all those minute tasks. And I think what AI allows you to do is to have a little bit more variety. What RPA previously allows you to do is allow you to do the automation, but very, very tight constraint to what you can automate. At least that's how I think about it, conceptually.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think we've covered quite a few topics today. And before we go about our business, I think for our listeners, it could be also very interesting to understand how you guys use ChatGPT or any of the other models. So can I ask you, what was the last task you let Gen AI help you with?
For me, the last task that Gen AI helped me with was just last night I needed to prepare a project plan, and then I provided pretty much like multiple set of Excel files and so on, and I said this is pretty much like my target end goal. These are examples of how it's being done. Please provided me with the result.
Amazing. And you, Max?
Oh, mine last one was trying to generate some sort of like a market report, trying to do market analysis. I read something online that someone was doing a top-down and bottom-up market analysis on a random company. So I was trying to do that. So it's
Nice.
pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Nice. And I think my last task was definitely to try build a website, just a landing page, just kind of like for myself. And I thought it was really helpful just to have someone help with the content and the copywriting. And now I'm trying to find a way to also automate, build a landing page without just in a 3 or 5 clicks or something like that. But anyways, this was fun, guys. Thank you so much. And we will be hearing from each other next week.
And don't forget to always follow us on chrisrosmax.com.